Welcome to the Leaky Lynn Pod, where awareness saves brains. I'm Lynn, and this first episode is personal because before I became Leaky Lynn, I was a surgical tech trying to hold it together in the operating room while my own brain was literally leaking spinal fluid. For years, I knew something was wrong. I had dizziness, pressure, brain fog, earfulness, confusion, memory issues, headaches, balance problems, and moments where I truly felt like I was losing myself. But I kept showing up. I scrubbed surgeries. I helped take care of patients. I worked in a high pressure operating room where focus, memory, and quick thinking matter every single second. And the hardest part was I was part of the medical world, but I still couldn't get answers. I was misdiagnosed. I was misunderstood. I was told it was migraines, anxiety, vestibular issues, allergies, stress, everything except what it really was, a cranial CSF leak. My brain was struggling and I was still expected to perform like nothing was happening. At work, I tried to push through symptoms that no one could see. When I was dizzy, I pushed through. When I was confused, I masked it. When my memory failed, I blamed myself. When I felt overwhelmed, I tried to breathe through it and kept going. But invisible illness doesn't stay invisible forever. Eventually, the symptoms started affecting how people saw me. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't careless. I wasn't not taking accountability. I was neurologically struggling. And instead of understanding, I felt judged. I was trying to keep my job while also trying to survive my own brain injury. One of the hardest things about a CSF leak is that you can look normal while your brain is not functioning normally. People see you walking, talking, working. They assume that you're fine, but they don't see the pressure. They don't see the panic when your brain fog hits. They don't see the shame of forgetting things. They don't see the fear of losing your career, your insurance, your income, and your identity. I wasn't just fighting for a diagnosis. I was fighting to keep my life from falling apart. Eventually, I found out what was really happening. I had a skull base defect, an encephalocele, and a CSF leak. I needed brain surgery. And looking back, it still shocks me that I was helping in surgery while needing brain surgery myself. One thing I don't talk about enough is the emotional impact of being written up while I was unknowingly living with a neurological condition. Every write up felt personal. I started questioning myself. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe everyone else can handle life and work, and I just can't. When you're dealing with a brain fog, dizziness, memory issues, and exhaustion, you already doubt yourself. Every criticism adds another layer of guilt and shame. I wasn't showing up to work trying to make mistakes. I was showing up trying to survive. I was working in surgery while fighting symptoms I couldn't explain. There were days I felt like my brain wasn't working the way it used to. I struggled to find words. I forgot things. I felt disconnected from myself. And because I didn't have a diagnosis yet, I carried the weight of believing maybe it was somehow my fault. That emotional burden was almost as difficult as the physical symptoms. When people hear CSF leak, they often think about headaches and or surgery. What they don't see is everything it could take from you before ever getting diagnosed. For me, it wasn't just physical symptoms. It affected my relationships. It affected my career. It affected how I saw myself. When your brain isn't functioning the way it should, the people around you often don't understand what's happening. When you cancel plans because you're exhausted, you forget conversations, you become withdrawn because you're struggling just to get through the day. You stop feeling like yourself. And sometimes people you love interpret those changes as not caring, being distant, being moody, or not trying. Relationships become strained. Misunderstandings grow. Some relationships don't survive. The hardest part is knowing that the person everyone was frustrated with wasn't really me. It was a version of me struggling with an undiagnosed neurological condition. Then there was work. I had spent years building a career in surgery. I loved helping patients. I loved being part of the surgical team. My job wasn't what I did, it was part of who I was. Yet, while my brain was leaking, I was trying to function in one of the most demanding environments imaginable. The symptoms followed me into work every day. The dizziness, the confusion, the memory problems, the exhaustion, the feeling that my brain was operating through a thick fog. I kept pushing, I kept showing up, I kept trying to prove that I could still do the job. But eventually, the struggle became impossible to hide. Instead of understanding what was happening medically, I found myself being judged based on my symptoms I couldn't explain, being written up while unknowingly dealing with a brain leak was devastating because every write up reinforced a lie I was already telling myself. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm failing. Maybe I'm not good enough anymore. When I finally learned my brain was actually leaking spinal fluid, it changed everything. Suddenly, years of symptoms made sense. But it was also heartbreaking because I realized how much damage had already been done, not just to my health, but to my relationships, my confidence, my finances, and ultimately my career. A CSF leak didn't just affect my brain, it affected every part of my life. That's why awareness matters. Because sometimes what looks like a struggling employee, a distant friend, or a different person entirely may actually be someone fighting a neurological condition that nobody has recognized yet. Then came the moment that changed everything. I learned I had a skull base defect, an encephalocele, and a cerebral spinal fluid leak. My brain was literally leaking. I remember feeling a mixture of emotions: shock, relief, anger, validation. Relief because I finally had an answer. Anger because I had spent years searching for one. For so long, I had been told different explanations, yet my symptoms kept getting worse. And suddenly, here it was, a real diagnosis, a physical reason for everything I had been experiencing. I was not imagining it. I was not weak. I was not lazy. My brain was actually under distress. What makes this story even harder is realizing there were clues along the way. For years, imaging reports mentioned mastoid air cell effusion. It appeared on scans reviewed by specialists. It appeared on scans ordered by ENT providers. It appeared on scans reviewed by neurologists. It even appeared on imaging from a hospitalization when I was in the ICU after a TIA event. The words were there: mastoid air cell effusion, over and over again. Yet nobody connected the dots. Nobody stepped back and asked, why does this finding keep showing up? Could there be an underlying skull defect? Could there be a CSF leak? Could there be an encephalocele? I often wonder how different my life might have been if those questions had been asked sooner. Maybe I would have received treatment earlier. Maybe I wouldn't have spent years wondering what was wrong with me. Maybe I wouldn't have lost so much of myself along the way. That is one of the reasons I started the Leaky Lynn Pod. Not because I have all the answers, but because I know what it's like to be the patient everyone sees, yet nobody truly understands. I know what it's like to have symptoms dismissed. I know what it's like to read your own imaging report and discover clues that were hiding in plain sight. And I know what it's like to finally hear the words, "You have a CSF leak." Those words changed my life, not because they solved everything, but because for the first time in years, they explained everything. And that's why I share my story, because awareness saves brains. Next time on the Leaky Lynn Pod, I will tell the story how I started reading my own imaging reports and how one overlooked radiology finding became the clue that finally led me to answers. Stay tuned.